And now we'll just kind of dive right into the main event. My name is Emily Holland, and I'm the editor of Poet Lore, which is America's oldest poetry magazine. We publish in print twice a year here at the Writers Center. Follow the link in the chat to check out some of our previous issues, which are now sold out in print. So we have digital copies available, but subscribe now to get our newest issue, which will be out in the next month. It's our first issue with a new guest editor, Tarfia Faizullah, who has a folio on surrealism and strangeness. So I'm super excited to have those poems out in the world. But tonight, I'm excited to welcome you to the Writer Center Virtual Craft Chat series, where we talk with writers a little less about what they wrote and a little bit more about how they wrote it. And please welcome tonight's guest, Adrienne Christian. Adrienne, we're so excited to have you to talk about your book, Worn. If you could start us off by just kind of introducing yourself and your book, and maybe read one or two poems to get us started, that would be great.
Sure. Well, thank you all for having me. This is great. My name is Adrienne Christian. I'm the author of 3 poetry collections. This is the latest one, out by Santa Fe Writers Project. Came out on the 1st of April. And you can tell from the cover that the book is about clothing. Every poem in here has something to do with clothing. And I wrote the book because I was interested in the role that clothing plays in our love stories and our life story. So that's how Worn was born. And so 1 or 2 poems. Okay, I can read you a couple. I'll start with this one. It's called The Wedding Dress. And this one was nominated for a Pushcart and also won an award or two. I think the Common Ground Poetry Award this one won. So I'll go ahead and start with this one. I should warn you that there's just a little bit of language, okay? Okay, Wedding Dress. Can you guys hear me okay? Yes, okay. Problem is, I need to be blotted out. My family's DNA, my daddy, the gangster, his mother, the moron, my mother, the daughter pimper, her mother, the monster. When I finally met my mother's father and asked how many kids he had, he spit, "What kind of dog go digging around for shit?" My mother's mom was his coworker's wife. I asked my daddy if he was sure I was his firstborn, and he told me emphatically, "I think so. I'm pretty sure you are." His daddy let him use his house to bring his women. Even on Christmas, yes, I distinctly remember one Christmas with young Auntie Deb smiling, unwrapping her gifts while my stepmom sat on the basement steps crying in her eggnog. A few of Daddy's prettiest cousins he'd fucked, he admitted. And when I met Uncle Womack's fresh out of the halfway house son, he said, "Come on, cuz, you want something to eat?" He poured us beer and Cheetos on a plastic plate. As we ate, he turned on a porno. I told him, "No, take me home now." I told my uncle and my dad. They asked, "Well, what were you wearing? Those jeans with the holes in the ass?" This same uncle sewed t-shirts at my half-sister's wedding. "This ain't swag, I'm sick and sore," and dog is God spelled backwards. Half the Hendricks have what they call the sugar. Long gone kidneys and toes, still making pies and drinking. Uncle Kevin gave my daddy a kidney. Daddy still drank and smoked in front of him. I chose the justice of the peace to wed because I know my people aren't worth their $25 a plate. I'd get $5 in a card from 8 of them. My auntie Sally thought I was marrying rich because my fiance had a business card, or as she calls it, a business card. She wears every piece of jewelry she owns every single day, all of it worth about $13. But for some reason, my man decides to marry me. He keeps looking at me and can't stop smiling. "Do you solemnly swear you are not brother and sister?" the judge asked that day in January. Both of us raised our hands. We solemnly swear. My new husband takes me home, and while he's inside me says, "I want to give you a baby." But I'd already gone to my New Orleans aunties and gotten myself fixed to not have kids and not told them. Yes, I knew he'd really wanted a family with me. I also knew he didn't know what he was asking. This one's called Dancing with Him, or My Husband's Back Muscles. Have him hold you, and you'll never have another man hold you again. They will all be boys compared. Have him walk you to the dance floor, spin you once, then pull you close, whisper to you his cinnamon Altoids breath. What he's telling you, girl, I'd fight a polar bear with fish in my pocket every night for you, and watch him grin at you like you're a pie, you're a paycheck. Have him rock you all night and still feel steady.
Thank you. Thank you so much for kicking us off with that reading. I am so excited that you read Wedding Dress because that was one of my favorite poems in the collection, but it's always hard to pick favorites, so I don't do that. But I do want to remind everyone in the audience that we take questions from you all as we're talking. So if you have anything that you want us to chat about, please put it in the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and I'll try to just keep an eye on everything in there as we go along. And also, please buy a copy of Mourn. We have a link in the chat to Santa Fe Writers Project to buy directly from them. And trust me, you will want to pick up this book if you don't have a copy already. So now we'll dive into the questions. This one we like to start out with, but sometimes it can be a little bit of a stumper, and it's about kind of, what we notice in the world and also about our own writing. So is there something that you do in your own work that you think maybe goes unnoticed, or maybe something that's habit or a craft element that you rely on that you try to write into, or maybe try to write against if you find yourself leaning on it too heavily?
That's a good question. So actually, one of the things that I try not to do, and I'm not so sure if people notice it, is that I try very hard not to write about racial trauma. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Warren has a couple poems in it that deal with race. But you remember when was it? I think it was Toni Morrison who said, write the book that you want to read. And one thing that troubles me a lot is when I want to read for pleasure, I'm always confronted with this, with racial trauma. If you look at a lot of the books that are recommended, for example, for the Black Lives Matter series, things like that, they tend to be racially traumatizing things. Things about police brutality, about who's been killed lately, about who's, murder went unsolved lately. And I just don't want to have that in everything I read, because sometimes I'd like to read for joy. And something like that will completely take me out of a joyful feeling. So I'm not so sure that that many people are recognizing that, but I generally don't write very much about race.
Yeah. I feel like that is something that felt intentional in the way that intimacy and even these kind of investigations of lineage through clothes were very much the focal point in Worn. And, the back cover writes tenderness meets pain meets joy. And so there's that balance where one narrative isn't taking over.
Yes, with an emphasis on joy and with an emphasis on love. Like a lot of these poems too are love poems, not just romantic love, but filial love, agape love. And so I'm not sure if people recognize that, but certainly the back cover gives them some indication of that. So thank you for saying that, and I am glad that you noticed.
Yeah, I wonder too. You mentioned that this is your third book. So how does Worn kind of fit in with your other two collections? How do you see them kind of transforming, or your work transforming?
That's a really great question too. So they are all about love in some way, Black love in some way. The first one was about familial love and relationships. And when I say love, it's not always happy ending type of love. Sometimes it's the painful love, like you just talked about on the back cover of that. So that's what they're all about. The first one is, say, pretty sad. The second one I would say is pretty sexy. And then this one is more neutral, like I toned down with Warren, tone down the moments that might the moments that might make people blush. Mm-hmm. So I think Warren has a couple of some family stuff for sure, and then some sexy stuff, but not as sexy as the last one for sure.
That definitely makes me want to go pick up the last one, because for sure, maybe toned down in content, but you definitely don't shy away from bringing light to different situations or really going heavy hitting. I mean, I'm thinking of the hustle that uses ball smell as the repeated words, right? Which is incredible. And I think that something that I loved about this collection was just those moments of surprise, those moments where I felt like you as the poet were like, yes, I'm putting this in a poem and you're going to read it. So I wonder if you could talk about, how you lean into those moments of you really, being confident on the page. Whereas I feel like a lot of times as writers, we're like, well, do we write a poem? Is that a poem? Does it go in a poem? Does it belong? And I feel like you're really out here saying like, all of this is poetry. Our lives are poetry. And so we're going to put it on the page. So, could you talk about how you've grown into that voice, or is that something that you've always mastered?
So again, really great question. So I am not shy. I wish I were, like I really do, because so many people have either said to me or I've heard them say about my work that it is raw, or that I don't have a filter or anything like that. And that actually is not true. I very much have a filter. I really do think about, what I want to say, and I still come out on the side of shocking people. So, but they feel it. So that's the first thing, is that I'm just not a shy person. So I, write about things that, non-shy people would write about. That's the first thing. The second thing that I am and do, and I tell my students, I recently retired from classroom teaching, but I would tell my students to write a good poem, don't lie. Just don't lie. If you are attracted to, if you're writing a poem, let's say, and it's about you being attracted to your, mom's best friend, say that. You can go back later and do some tweaking to make sure that if your mom or your best friend read the poem, they don't know that you're talking about them. But go ahead and just tell the truth. My experience has been that's when people really feel you. Truth is something, isn't it? It's something, it's powerful. One of my friends has this favorite quote where she says, the truth doesn't care who tells it. And I completely agree with that. I think it wants to be, like, I just got chills when I said that. So I think it wants to be known. And it's powerful. And so it gives poems power in that way. The third thing I'll say about that is that I have a little formula that I do in terms of writing about things that people may shy away from. And so the first is I'm honest with myself about what I'm feeling, right? So if my husband and I are lying on the sofa and I've got my head in his lap and I start to get turned on because I'm smelling his pheromones, then I'll just remember it. I won't write it down yet. But then when I hear one other person say something about that, then I go, okay, so people will feel this. So do you guys know there's there's a quote in the Bible that says something like, where two or more are gathered in my name, I'm with them. Like, I think those are Jesus' words or something like that. So I kind of feel the same way as far as my subject matter, like where two agree, me and one other person, then I feel like, then the world will feel it. So two is sort of my representative number. And I was talking to my girlfriend, Cynthia, about, our husbands, and she mentioned something about his balls. And I was like, that's two. I've got permission to write this poem. And I did. And people really like it. People really like it. So I'm glad you mentioned that one.
Yeah, no, I think there's something so truthful in that, in just sort of that reciprocal feeling, and that kind of gives you the permission to, like, okay, now I can move into this space and know that there's at least one reader out there who will identify with it. And if at least one person, then there's definitely more, because of the probability of you not knowing the people that would, Yes. So I think that's very sound advice.
That's exactly it. And I also really like to, I try to be original, and think of how many poems you see that have like the word cock in them, for example. But how many times do you see balls?
And now we're all thinking, I see everyone's faces. No, that is great. I feel like we could have a whole discussion on just word choice and things. So maybe we'll come back to that too. But I also just love what you said about truth, writing the truth, even if it's in that first draft, and then you kind of tweak things for, protecting people's identities and things like that. But I think that's so important, is to make sure the truth is there, and then the truth will stay there no matter where it goes in revision. And I'm thinking now, I don't know if I sent you a question about your revision process, but now I'm kind of curious about it. What is your kind of drafting to final process, or if there is a final draft? How does revision work when you're putting that truth on the page from the get-go, and how do the poems kind of transform along the way?
Okay, so I can tell you about the revision process for Warren. I got started with Warren, excuse me. I was actually putting together, I really love clothing. I really love fashion and style. And so I wanted to put together an anthology of poetry that was all about clothes. And so I did that. I completed that project, and I never sent it out to be published, though, because it kind of transformed into Warren. And so in reading the poems about clothing, of course, I started writing them, because reading is always what fuels me. Like so many of my poems are from me reading something and then sitting down to write. So I was already writing about clothes from that collection that I was doing. And so then I just ended up with this stack of poems that had clothes in them. And then at the time I was finishing up I was getting, I think, in the second year of my PhD. I got my PhD from the University of Nebraska. I'm sure you guys know the really awesome poet, Kwame Dawes. He's my mentor. And so when I went to him and said, hey, I think I've got a collection here, he said, all right, well, then let's block out 3 hours of time. We're going to go into the conference room, bring everything that you have, and, type it all out, bring everything that you have, and then let's start to see what you've got here. And so he literally said, okay, this one is about money. Put that one in this pile. Okay, this one is about family. Put that in that pile. And then we ended up having maybe like 15 piles or so. And of course, that would be too long of a collection. And so we had to start thinking about how to whittle it down. And so if one, let's say in the money pile, could also be in, a family pile, then I would take it out of there and put it into another pile, so that we just had fewer fewer chapters. And then from there, I organized the collection to lead with the strongest one. Like I started this collection with the one about my uncle and being the only Black person on the job. And that was the one that got a lot of tears in workshop, like even men crying. And so I knew I wanted to start the collection with something that was strong like that. So I did. And then if there was something that I really liked, but it didn't go in the collection, rather than just keep poking at it and changing the poem and making it get to something that I didn't recognize anymore or didn't have the power anymore, I only played with the title to make it fit. So for example, with the one about the butcher's apron, that was originally called Harlem Gentrification, but it was a strong poem, and it had already been published, but it wasn't one about clothing. So I just started calling it The Butcher's Apron, and it worked and it fit. And so I was able to keep that strong poem in there without, messing with it too much. So that's how the revision process of Worn started coming together. But in terms of me revising on a whole, I think one of the most important things you can do is get eyes on it. Feedback is, I can't even say how important feedback is. Another set of eyes to ask questions about what you meant, to clear up anything you were thinking. Okay, so just to give you one more example of that, using the poem about my uncle, I talk about him ironing his shirt for work. But what I had originally said was he was ironing his work shirt. And one of my friends said, okay, so when I think work shirt, I think of a person who is blue collar, who's got his name on his shirt, like a work shirt like that. And that just gave me chills. So I knew that was right and that I needed to change it. And shirt for work fit because it's a poem about white collar work, that sort of thing. So just somebody to tell you, to give you feedback on it is priceless. Workshop is priceless. You can't live without it.
Yeah, I think that connects back to what we were talking about earlier, that reciprocation, that identification, someone else identifying with something in the same way as a workshop or even a feedback situation, someone else bringing their own kind of imagery and background to what you've put on the page can really give you a different perspective. And, even, for better, for worse, sometimes feedback isn't always helpful, but sometimes it is definitely, so eye-opening and enlightening and can make or break that first draft into the finished project.
And you know what feedback is good and which isn't. You just like you get chills or you have that aha moment. It's like what my husband calls eating the chicken and spitting out the bones. Like you take what you need and then the other stuff you don't need, you thank them for their work. If they don't understand your vision, okay. But those ones who get it, they really get it and you really feel it. So yeah, feedback is important.
Yeah. Maybe I'll take a minute here if Zach is ready with the links to once again mention that we do offer workshops through the Writers Center, and most of those are virtual now. So definitely if you're in need of a workshop space for your own poetry or prose, check those out. We also have writing groups for members that work in a similar way, just a little bit less structured. So definitely check that out as well. If Zach has the link for that, I might have sprung that on him, surprise. So that link might be coming later, but let's get back to the book. So we've talked about the form of the book, but we haven't really talked about the different forms of poems that you use. And I always love encountering forms in books because they always catch me by surprise because they don't always announce themselves. I feel like because sometimes you see something and it's titled Ghazal for my long lost sister. And so you know immediately what to expect. But the forms here, the title doesn't give anything away. So you kind of discover the ghazals as you read them, or you discover, the use of the Scrabble in the Scrabble poem, or we're discovering maybe something that kind of looks like a sonnet, feels like a sonnet. So my first question about form is what attracts you to form, and then, maybe breaking form when you write poems?
That's a good question. So what attracts me to form is love. I love form. And also tradition. I grew up like in school, we weren't reading contemporary poets like Yusef Komunyakaa. We weren't reading Kwame Dawes. We were reading Shakespeare, Dickinson, Yeats, people who wrote in form for the most part. And if they didn't write in form, then they certainly wrote in rhyme or something like that. So that's just sort of what I grew up on and what I loved. And then also my bachelor's is in English with a concentration in 19th century British literature. So like going back to that time, much of poetry was in form. So that's what attracted me to it. And I think that as far as the poems in this collection, they told me what they wanted to be. They told me the form. So like with the Scrabble poem, yes, since we were playing Scrabble, it had to look like a Scrabble board. And that's, again, a true story. My husband and I, we play Scrabble with sex words, with love and sex words. And it's a really fun game if you guys want to try it later on tonight. And then like the one about books, so a hustle lends itself, I think, to anything that's obsessive. If you keep thinking about something, if you keep thinking about someone, if you keep saying, over and over, if you have the same problem over and over, a hustle kind of lends itself to that. Sestinas, I think, lend themselves to poems where you are really trying to work something out in your mind. Like, well, I like this, but I don't like it. But then if I think about it this way, then it's okay. If I think about it another way, it's okay. And then you have, 7 stanzas to do that with. So I feel like the poem always tells me what it wants to be in terms of form. Now, if I'm not writing in form, I still feel like it tells me in what it wants to be, in that I try to make the form on the page mimic the subject matter. Like if I'm writing something that's a really heavy subject, let's just say, then I'll write it in a square, because like a block, like a heavy weight on you. And so I wish I could take credit for that, but yeah, it just tells me what it wants to be. I just know it. Like, it's like I'm a hustle. So I just go, okay, fine, you're that today.
Yeah. Sometimes you do just have to listen to the draft and listen to the way that you're writing. I think I love repetition, and that's one of the reasons why I love the hustle, because that repetition that is so incessant at the end of those couplets. But, I feel like sometimes I'll be writing and I'll start repeating things. I'm like, oh, this is kind of maybe telling me it wants to be something else and it wants to go there, but I've been pushing it the wrong way. And I love what you said too about, subject matter. I'm thinking of even Wedding Dress, which you read, is very long, almost like a train of the dress itself. And you can imagine, it's talking through lineage. So that kind of lends itself to length too. So now I'm definitely going back and really seeing that come through the poems, which is incredible.
That's exactly it.
And when you are putting together a collection, do you think about, how much you want to use sort of received forms and how much you kind of just want to have the poems be what they are? Is there any sort of consideration of, well, I want to have like a sonnet and a sestina and a pantoum, do you think about that, or do you just let them look at
So
that?
Not quite, not when I'm writing it. Not when I'm writing them, when I'm putting the collection together, yes. So for example, I took out lots of poems that were in form because I just didn't want to have too much form. I mean, these days with poetry, most of it is free verse. So I didn't want to have a form heavy collection. So in that way, I'll take out, like if it's too much, if there are too many sonnets, if there are too many hustles, if some are too close to each other, then I'll just kind of move them about in that way, but not in the actual writing of it.
Good. Yeah. No, that's helpful too, just in conceptualizing putting together a book, because you do have to think about trends in publishing and what readers are looking for too. And I think as much as we want to push that away while we're in the throes of the writing process, when we're at that kind of book submission stage, we really want to see, you know, okay, so what are people responding to? What are publishers responding to? What are readers responding to? And I definitely thought that there was a great balance between all the poems here.
So I'm so glad that you said that you mentioned the reader, because I forgot to mention that when I was talking about form before. One thing that's really important for me is that people who are not poets, or people who are not academicians, or people who don't call themselves literature lovers can understand and appreciate and like my work. And one way to do that is to put it in a form. Because one thing that I hear people say, like when I teach poetry in the community, is, why is this a poem? What makes this a poem? What I would teach my students is that, listen, a poem is a short story that uses at least one of the poetic devices. Mm-hmm. And so if, and so, you know, they can come to it with that kind of understanding. Okay, that's fine. But generally the average person who's not a literature head doesn't understand why free verse is a poem. So I use some elements of why free verse is a poem. So I use some elements of form that they will for sure know, like alliteration, that will sort of be a flag to say, okay, this is doing something here, or rhyme that will make them say, okay, this is doing something here, or repetition. So that's one of the reasons that I write in form and do a little bit of form play, is so that the average person can still get something out of it if they're not, you know, if they don't have a PhD in literature.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. And I think so important too, as we think about poetry, you know, being for us as writers, but also for readers. You know, we write so that readers can access our work and hopefully identify with something that we also deeply felt. And so I think that that's so important. And I think too, it just makes it, you know, this is a book that you want to teach, because you can kind of point out the things like that. So I think it's doing a lot for this book. Again, everyone, please purchase Worn if you haven't already. I wanted to ask about the structure of the book in these kind of 9 sections. You talked about in that kind of initial meeting, putting the poems in piles. Are these 9 sections reflective of those initial piles? Did they change? And how did you kind of conceptualize that?
Yes. So I chose to not put the section titles on there, just because I wanted to complicate it a little more and have the reader be able to have the joy of figuring out what each section is about. But all the 9 sections are about something, like whether it's here, I'll just open up and tell you. Whether, like, the first one is about family, the second one is romantic love, the third one is about the neighborhood, the fourth one is about one's children, fifth is place, in particular Nebraska. So I definitely, you know, there was a reason to my rhyme in this, in doing that. But I wanted the reader to sort of come to that on his or her own. I didn't want to beat them over the head with it. You know, with poetry, you never want to make it too easy. You want to make it understandable, of course. You know, one of my mentors, Nikki Finney, told me, Adrienne, be clear. So I try to be clear about things so that there's not too much, you know, muddling going on. But at the same time, it's a big payoff for the reader when they figure something out. And so I wanted to do that. So that's why I didn't put the title sections. That's why I didn't put the titles on the sections.
Yeah, I also feel like that enables readers, or at least how I experienced it, to also feel free to kind of move the thread through almost and really want to see, okay, I know that these are separate, but they're also obviously connected under this larger umbrella. And I love using the word thread in relation to this book because it's so much about clothing. And there's so many different clothing images that extend throughout the book and come back. And I wanted to ask how you kind of manage that use of extended imagery. I know you mentioned, really being fascinated with the clothing, and then having this whole book kind of come out of that preoccupation and the reading. So how did you kind of manage, I guess, the movement of the clothes and the speaker in relation to these different clothes across all these poems?
I'm so glad you said that, because actually that was one of the ways that I had planned to organize it. Mm-hmm. So at first I was going to put, like blouses and pants and, suits, and kind of organize it that way. I didn't do that for two reasons. The first thing is that I just thought that made it too sort of easy and blocky. And then the second reason is that that anthology that I mentioned to you earlier, that I was putting together that even inspired this one, that's how that one is organized. And I didn't want them to be too close to each other. So I felt like, first of all, just being completely honest about whatever piece of clothing it was that I was thinking about or wearing and writing the poem that way. And then organizing it in a different way to where the clothing would be more subtle. And again, give the reader a chance to find and enjoy the thread without beating them over the head with it and going, hey, here's a poem about a hat. And then you're reading a poem about the hat.
Right. And it sounds like maybe that first inclination was to almost organize it like a closet, but now it's almost organized like, I don't want to say like a laundry bin, everything is kind of has been worn already. And now, we're kind of pulling through the pieces and figuring it out and putting it together.
I'm so glad you said that, because I also had another title originally. I was calling it Woven. That also had the clothing feel and the fabric feel and things like that. But then when I thought about, what these people are going through in this collection, I mean, love, family, drama, all this stuff puts a lot of wear and tear on you, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why I decided to call it Warm, because not only was it the reference to the clothing, but also just about like life and how, it isn't always delicate, and how it can wear you down, and how you, can emerge better having been worn down. So that's what I was thinking about. I'm so glad you picked up on all this. I hope you teach poetry, because you know what you're talking about.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I, like I said, maybe at the beginning of the chat, I just love getting to spend this much time close reading a book like this. So it's truly my pleasure. I do want to dive into the chat window because I see a few questions. So Kobe is asking, saying, thank you for sharing your time. I find people who aren't already into poetry see it as a high bar to enter. What do you see most often sparking interest in poetry for the person who hasn't yet conceived of themselves as a reader of poetry? That's a great question.
Oh, it is a great question. And I just got chills when you asked it, because let me tell you, so many people feel so strongly that they can't understand it. And I am like, you can. I think probably what that comes from, again, is school, where we had to read poetry more for analyzing it instead of for enjoying it. And so if you read something that you thought was one thing, but your teacher thought was another, and when you told him or her, hey, I think it's this, and they go, wrong, then it really takes you out of it. So I would say, short poems certainly help. So for example, if you're a teacher and you want to start introducing poetry, if you are just like in a community space and you want to start introducing some poetry to people who feel like the bar is too high, start with something short. Something short can be a lot less intimidating. And the second thing I would say is do something that share some poetry that doesn't have a lot of gray area in terms of what it's about. Like with, I'm thinking about one of my poems to use as an example, like Hospital Gown. You know, that poem says, if you want to know who your friends are, get sick. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that all of us have gone through that experience of whether you're a poet or not, whether you read poetry or not, whether you like literature at all, of going through a hard time in your life, sickness, down on your luck with money, maybe having some housing instability or something like that, and realizing that the people who you thought would be there for you weren't. And so again, something like that, that doesn't leave any sort of gray area for what it's about is a really great way to bring people into it who think that it's a little bit too high bar. The other thing I would say is introduce some poets who are accessible, like me. Mary Oliver, of course, who doesn't love Mary Oliver? Ted Kooser is another really, really quietly brilliant, understandable poet. So yes, not Shakespeare. I mean, that's another language, right? But yeah, those are my recommendations. Something short, something accessible, and something that doesn't leave a lot of room for interpretation. And then I would also say, encourage those people to write poetry. Yeah. Part of the joy of reading poetry is if you write it yourself. So yeah, that's what I would suggest. That's what I do.
Yeah, those are such great suggestions. I always run into that, especially I feel with my family members, you know, when you tell them you're a poet and they're like, well, I don't understand that. I'm like, well, you read other things, you know, this is just another type of reading that is, you know, kind of plugging you into the human experience. We're all human. We're all experiencing this life. And I think what you said about writing poetry as well. One of my first poetry classes that I took was called Imitations. And, you know, we would read a poet and then we would write something, you know, using some of their tools and modeling it after them. And that really helped kind of unlock what felt like the sticky parts. You know, those aren't the poems that you would really want to go on to publish because they're in those kind of baby, like Lego block modes, but they really help to kind of clarify and be like, oh, okay, I can do what they do and it's not scary.
Yes. Go on and baby step into it. Yes.
Yeah. So Andrew is asking if you could tell us about the publishing journey and breaking the trope that poetry doesn't sell. What's it like to be a poet moving through the traditional publishing world? Many publishers are dismissive of poets, but that's foolish. It is foolish. Thank you, Andrew. Poetry can and does sell well. So yeah, talk about your publishing journey, how you found Santa Fe Writers Project, who we love, and just, you know, your views on this kind of publishing world that we're a part of.
Well, can I be honest without getting in trouble?
This is a space for the truth. We've established that.
So my publishing journey with poetry, first of all, shout out to Andrew and Santa Fe Writers Project, because it wasn't until I got with them that I really felt like a professional poet because of the way that they do business. So again, it's not my intention to hate on the publishers that I had before them, before Santa Fe, but in my experience, unfortunately, they weren't running. I want to just be respectful. So for example, if your publisher doesn't even get a booth at AWP, what are you to make of that? Do you know what I mean? If your publisher wants to pay you in books instead of in money, what are you to make of that? If they require you to do all of your own advertising, again, what are you to make of that? So, and unfortunately, I hear a lot of poets say that they had really bad experiences with their poetry publishers, that they didn't see a dollar. They had almost no press. They needed to do all their own advertising. I think a lot of poetry publishers maybe, you know how some businesses like just do some things just to write it off and get a payday for themselves that way. Unfortunately, that was my experience, and with a lot of other poets that I've talked to. And it's not, I mean, these are poets too who have names where, they get with publishers who don't care that much about their poets and about their poets' books. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I was mistaken for another poet, who is, I guess she looks like me to some people. We both have dreadlocks, but we look nothing alike. She's, a half a foot taller, many shades darker, wears glasses. Our names both start with A. I guess that's another reason why you could mix this up. But how disheartening to not have your publisher take you seriously or take your work seriously. So for that reason, I almost stopped writing to publish. I just said, I can't make a living like this. What am I doing? I'm spending more money than I'm actually, making. And my husband, who is very much business minded, asked me one day, and I broke down in tears, and he just said, who's going to buy this? This was before Santa Fe, why are you doing this? Why do you continue to do this? And you aren't making any money from it. And so I had to really ask myself that question. And then, by the grace of my lucky stars at AWP, I was on a panel about, thank you, Mina. I was on a panel about, it was a nonfiction panel, and Monica Prince, the editor for Santa Fe.
Love Monica.
Isn't Monica amazing? Monica is the Monica that Warren is dedicated to. She's that amazing. Thank you, Monica, if you're out there. So she asked to publish my essay, and then we became friends. And then when I originally had another publisher for Warren, and when I got wind of the fact that publisher just also was not taking my work seriously, I posted it on Facebook that I needed a home for it. And then Monica wrote to me and said, "Hey, we're your peeps." And so I was like, yes. And Andrew, Santa Fe has just been wonderful, professional. I remember one time writing to Andrew and saying, "It's a pleasure to work with you." And he wrote back, "It's a pleasure to work with you." So, and that's the kind of vibe that you want to get from your publisher, the one who understands that you're bringing them some value, who respects your work. I don't want to get emotional talking about this, but another time Andrew called my work impossibly perfect. And that means a lot. Someone who cares, So poet, you can make money. I am making money. It feels fantastic. And then what happens is that's how you start to get a career, because one gig leads to another one and to another one and another one. And the next thing you know, you're talking to you guys.
Yeah, no, I think that is so important to keep in mind, is to go where you and your work are respected and wanted. I think sometimes we get so, I don't really want to say desperate, but we think that there's such a scarcity model, like, oh, no one gets published. So the second someone jumps in, we're so quick to take any kind of crumbs. And I think that, thank you, Andrew and Santa Fe Writers Project, for modeling such a great publishing experience. And I think, just telling the world that poetry is valued and is valued at this press. And I'm sure there are some others too, but I think by and large, the publishing world runs on this kind of scarcity model, or runs on the contest model where you pay $50 and you maybe get publication in $1,000 and that's it. And so I think, definitely going where your work is wanted and appreciated.
And I love what you said about just not choosing the first person that comes along. I mean, yeah, and desperate, I think it's the right word. Yes, because you are desperate to get published, especially if you want to teach, because they say, hey, you have to have been published. So you kind of take the first person that comes along. But I would say that you have to be selective. Think about it as like a partner, because it is a partnership. So you wouldn't take the first man or woman who came, well, maybe you would, but you shouldn't. The first person who came along to show some interest in you. And don't do that with your publisher either. And also ask people who are published with them what their experience has been, and they will tell you whether or not it's a good vibe.
That is such great advice. And I think that's one great benefit of something like social media, where you can kind of reach out to people in this kind of common space and be like, hey, I saw that you published with them. Like, can you give me the scoop? How was your experience? Because I think it's so important just to know what you're getting into, and to, again, have the support for your work that it deserves. Don't take less for your work and then kind of regret it in the long run. But yeah, that is so heartening.
One more thing about Santa Fe and Andrew, and it's not only poetry. For example, they just published fine work. For example, Mona at Sea is a fiction. You know that one? She and I have just become so cool. Like, I've gotten another gig from her, from the author, and it's a community. So I've got now relationships not only with Monica, the editor, not only with Andrew, the publisher, not only with Elizabeth and other writers, but like a whole like family and community of people. And it's just like this whole snowball of goodness. So that's what you get when you get a good publisher. It's not just, it's great that it's about people who like your poetry, but it's even bigger than that. So it's like more than what you even hoped or dreamed.
Yeah. You always know that you have people in your corner and that you will support those other people who have, been in your corner as well.
For sure.
So we're getting some questions in the chat. If you could read your favorite poem from the collection.
Hey, Carol, I promised to buy. Thank you. My favorite poem. How does one choose? Well, since we talked about the ball smell, do you guys want to read that one?
Yes.
Okay, I don't want to have too much language here. I think this is Monica's favorite poem. And it is a hustle, but I got a little bit jiggy with balls and ball smell. So I go back and forth with that. All right. Ball smell. Girls, do you too love ball smell? Because I am in love with my husband's ball smell. Here we are sitting on the sofa. I've got my head in his lap. He's got on nothing but his drawers, that ball smell. Thinking about it, I shudder like a feather on the ear. I love his cologne too, but I really love his ball smell. We're watching Harlem Nights or whatever. Friday night, he's drinking Heineken. I'm drinking in that ball smell. These Boss black boxer briefs I stuffed in his stocking for Christmas. Right now, I'm about to stuff these giant balls in my mouth, teabag these awesome balls. I won't take off his drawers. I love these drawers. I'll just pull them to the side. Just enjoy the balls. Right now, he's trying to fuck, but all I want is this right now. I tell him, pour some Heineken on him. Balls.
Awesome. Thank you. And I love that we also got to hear some of that that rhyme and that rhythm that comes through in the other poems as well. I think that was a great poem to pick for your favorite one. And we got the form. I mean, I think it really brought together everything that we've been talking about. As a final question, I wanted to ask, I listened to an interview that you did kind of towards the end of 2020, and you just mentioned Monica publishing one of your nonfiction pieces. So, what's on the horizon for you? And then how does poetry kind of inform your work in these other genres that you're working in?
Okay, well, I'm so glad you asked that. Again, poetry definitely informs the other genres. And I would recommend to anybody who writes prose, write poetry first. Poetry gives you the music. Poetry gives you the language. Poetry gives you, so I just got chills again. It gives you the je ne sais quoi, like that helps the prose, makes it less prosaic. And so I'm working on two nonfiction pieces. One is a collection of essays. This one is called How I Got Over. And basically, it's just like it sounds. So I'm not sure if you've read my first poetry collection, but like I said at the beginning of the call, it was about some traumatic things that happened as a child and into early adulthood. And so I'm talking about how I got over. So many people, when they meet me, they think one thing about me. And when they learn my story, they go, well, how did you end up like this? And so I'm writing a blueprint for how I got this awesome life, how I started off this way with lots of abuse at the hands of my parents and community, and what I did, how I did it, who I talked to, how long it took, everything I did to get over, to get to the life that I have now, which is, a healthy body and mind, a partner who adores me, money in the bank, a career I love, all those things, because people always ask me, how did you get from there to there? So I'm just going to answer the question once and for all and write it in a book. Yes. And then also I want to stop talking about it. So that's my final way. I feel like that's in the past, that's over. So that's my sort of final way of going, okay, this is the last thing I'm going to say about this. So that's called How I Got Over. It's a collection of essays. They're already written right now. They're just living in a pile, talking to each other while I think about, what I want to keep in, what I want to take out, that kind of thing. So I guess editing, but not actively editing, just kind of waiting so that when I go back to it to edit, I'll be a better editor of it, know what I want to leave in and take out and that kind of thing. And then the other, thank you, Lisa. The other thing that I'm working on is fiction. So this one's called Tiny Diamonds. It's a novel about a woman of a certain age. She's 42, and she also is really happy with her life. She loves her space. She's looking for, can I say, fuck boy? You guys know what a fuck boy is? Okay, she's got a really great life. The only thing she's missing is a little bit of passion. She wants somebody just to come over on the weekends and sort of be a maintenance man and take care of some needs that she has. But she ends up finding a husband. So it's a woman of a certain age who is looking for a weekend lover who ends up finding a husband. And it's really, really fun. That's why I'm laughing talking about it. So it's really, really funny.
That's awesome. That's, it's great when you can get excited about your own projects and even your essay collection. Sounds like, again, something we talked about at the beginning of focusing on not the trauma, but the joy. And I think seems like both of those new projects seem like another way of you doing that and just kind of continuing that focus. So I don't want to take up any more time. Unfortunately, our time has come to an end. This is the worst part of the night to say goodbye, but thank you so much, Adrienne, for your generosity in answering our questions. And thank you for your words and your book. And thank you everyone in attendance for spending your Thursday evening with us. We're so thankful.
So great. Thank you all. This has been fantastic.